Hey everyone, I'm Angela Lynn.
And I'm Jesse Lynn, and welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? This week, Angela is joining us again from somewhere outside of the US. Is it still Korea at this point in time, or did you actually make it to Japan?
I am still in Korea. Japan is still closed to tourists that are not on tour groups. That is the latest as of today,
Oh my
June
gosh.
9th. They're
Juicy.
letting people on highly chaperoned, basically Big Brother style tour groups are the only ones allowed in right now.
Like the Fukushima radiation zone, you must say in this van. We just drive you around.
It's,
So
I mean, maybe.
So if you guys haven't intuited, this episode we're just going to be talking to Angela about her travels, how she's enjoyed it so far, what she's learned, highlights, and all of that. And again, I'm going to be your interviewer out of sunny California. So you're still in Korea currently. You've been there for 2 months, 3 months now?
So actually it's probably been like a month and a half.
Okay.
I landed April 27th.
It just seems like a time warp. I feel like you've been there forever.
Yes, I do feel like I've been here forever as well, and because I've been to many cities since I've been here in the month and a half, so it's not just like I haven't just been in Seoul this whole
Yeah.
time.
Nice. Have you picked up any Korean?
It's actually just like a little disgraceful how little Korean I know. I tried really hard, guys. It was like before I got here, I was like, oh, it would be really helpful to know some Korean or at the very least to learn the alphabet because I'd heard that the Korean alphabet is like relatively easy to learn because it's not that many characters. So I did do that on Duolingo, and I'm not perfect with it because frankly their like pronunciation is really difficult. It's like there are a lot of like really minor differences in how some things are pronounced that like sound the same in my head but to them are not the same. But yes, I did learn the alphabet, so at least I can like read names of things, but I don't know what they say. So no, I don't speak any Korean. I feel really bad, but all I really know is hello, thank you, please, this please, which I don't think is the same as just saying please in general. And that's about it. I just say thank you like a million times a day, and that's kind of all I got. And then I use Google Translate app, which is for the camera. It's actually been working
Oh yeah,
really
the
well. It's like
like
really helpful. Yes, yes. So like for menus and stuff, a lot of menus here are like only in Korean. So then I'll use the camera to translate it, and then either we'll just point to it and be like this thing, or I'll read it in Korean because I can read the characters. But yeah, without the camera app, I'd be screwed, I think.
wait, so you can pronounce the characters?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm pronouncing them like totally right, but like if there's a menu with the words and I'm just trying to say it, they like get it. You know what I mean?
Okay, I mean, better than
I
nothing,
I learned the
honestly.
alphabet. Yeah,
Okay, sweet.
exactly. It
Nice.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's all I got.
Um, you were the last time we talked. I think you said you were going to Jeju Island. How was that?
Jeju's awesome, TBH. We just got so I'm in Busan right now where everyone did not get turned into zombies. I was in Jeju Island up until a week ago, though. So I got here last Friday to Busan, and we were in Jeju for 2 weeks. And we were there one of the 2 weeks with my friend Lindsay from high school. She came to visit us for like the last days of Seoul, and then for a week in Jeju. Um, Jeju's awesome. It's basically like it's like the Hawaii of Korea, so it's like an island off of Korea and it's like more rural. They have like you can find, like luxury hotels and stuff, just like you can in Honolulu, for example, in Hawaii, but you can also find more just like kind of backcountry things. So it's really laid back and it's like Hawaii. There's like we hiked a volcano, like a dormant volcano, and there's like Yeah, they have these statues on the island that they're known for that are kind of everywhere. It's like the Easter Island statues
Oh,
but
cool.
of Jeju. So there's just like that island vibe. And there's a lot of really cute cafes, but that's kind of everywhere in Korea. But I guess the difference being that in Seoul, one of the reasons why I still know no Korean really is because compared to Japan, where like no one tries to speak English with you, even if they know some English, in Seoul, because there's so many young Korean people, they all know English to some extent. So they, even if it's like really bad English, they are more willing to like try to communicate with you with their broken English. So it's like enough for us to get by. But then in Jeju, it was like, yes, there's some young people working these places, but it's a lot of old grandmas and grandpas essentially, and so they don't know any English, so it was definitely like a lot more like yeah, pointing at stuff and like hoping it works out because it was not very English friendly. It was still like really cool but not very English friendly there.
You know, sometimes pointing is sufficient. What were these? Wait, what are these like rural activities you were talking about in Jeju Island? You're like not
I'm not
luxury
saying
hotels, but more rural things, like B&Bs.
oh no, I'm not saying that it's like rural activities. I'm saying the like environment is more
Oh,
rural.
okay, got
It
it.
was yeah. It's
Got it.
like we stayed in a pretty quiet neighborhood because we were in an Airbnb. And it was like it's kind of like Taiwan, you know, like especially Taiwan outside Taipei. So like a little bit more kind of just like ramshackle is like not the exact word I want to say, but like you know, it's kind of like more run down, just
Pastoral
like
is the nice word for it.
pastoral. I'm imagining like green meadows and stuff.
Exactly,
This is
that's
not
why it's
exactly
the nice
that.
word.
That's not really it. It's no, it's just what I don't know. If anyone's been to the countryside in Asia, it's what that is. It's just like people live in more humble, you know, settings, and that's totally fine. But then you can also find the like more gentrified shit. It's just like where people are spending high money count and stuff. But no, the activities were like, yeah, their biggest thing is Mount Halasan, which is like the largest dormant volcano that's part of there, and it's like you hike it and it takes all day to hike. It's like I mean, I think we did it faster than most blogs say it's supposed to take, but if you go at like a leisurely pace, I guess it's supposed to take like 10 to 12 hours to go up and down. So we did it in like 7, I think. But yeah, we did that, and then you can like go through like lava tubes. You know, it's all like the you know what you can
That's
do in
pretty cool.
Hawaii. It's like
That's
similar
pretty cool.
stuff. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
nice. So, before we get into the travel questions, I think specifically when you started telling the listeners of I was going to say the blog, the podcast. Sorry. Oh, I'm just used to saying certain things. Okay, the podcast that you were going traveling. I think there was a lot of curiosity from a lot of listeners, like financially, logistically, emotionally, philosophically, how you were gonna handle all of the work around traveling. So, do you want to, I guess, just give us a rundown of like how you've kind of arranged everything, maybe like the ins and outs, and also made it work from like the planning and like probably the money perspective is like where most people have their heads at.
Yeah, well, we wanted to live abroad in Asia for a while now. Like we had planned to do this year abroad like pre-pandemic. Like that's as early as when we were talking about it. We had always said like basically from the time we get married, it would just be like we wouldn't have a honeymoon. We would just go to this year in Asia and then come back to the US and like find a place to settle down, blah blah blah. So that was always the plan, and it was only because of COVID that it got pushed out, because obviously our wedding got pushed out, and then like actual travel capabilities got pushed out because all the borders everywhere were closed. So we had just been kind of waiting like indefinitely for borders to open. And we had always wanted to actually spend most of the year in Japan because Ramon loves Japan. I like Japan a lot, and we had lived there for a few months previously. So that was the original plan, was like Japan will be the main place. And then we also wanted to spend some time in Korea, some time in Taiwan. Like we're open to hopping around to different parts of Asia, but it was going to be like largely Japan. So basically, as I already mentioned, Japan is still closed. They're like open. I think if you Google headlines right now, they're very generous in describing the situation where they're like, Japan's open to tourists again. And it's just not true. It's like, it's really only open to people that are signed up for these like very distinct tours that they can track exactly where you are. And they're being super strict. Like, I think locals don't necessarily have to wear masks, but they're saying foreigners like have to wear masks 24 hours a day, essentially. And if you are caught not wearing a mask or not following like hand sanitizing or whatever other procedures, they have the right to like deport you, essentially. So they're being like very strict. Yeah, super strict on that. And they have not yet opened to just like general tourism. So we can't be in Japan. So we've definitely been in Korea longer than we anticipated to be staying here. I think in our heads we'd always said like, oh, 1 month in Korea would be like pretty dope because we watch a lot of Korean content now. So we were both like more hyped to go anyway. But I don't think we thought we'd be here more than a month. It just kind of worked out that way because Korea was the first major Asian country to like totally open its borders. And by Asia, I mean East Asia. Southeast Asia has been open, I think, for some time. Like you can go to Thailand and Vietnam and whatnot. But I guess our proximities were like as close to Japan as possible was what we were thinking. And Korea opened on April 1st. So we got in the end of April. So that's kind of how like the thought process was working out. And we were like, oh, we'll just like wait in Korea until Japan opens because then it's only a 2-hour flight to get into Japan as opposed to waiting in the US where it's going to be a 13-hour flight to get to Japan, you know. So that was the thinking around this year. Financially, honestly, so the thing is, I quit my job, right? Like a while ago now. I quit in, I think my last week was like November last year. And so it's not necessarily that I've been like saving up for this year abroad. I think I had been like saving up to quit my job in general. So I didn't necessarily say like I would only take this trip if I've hit like this milestone from dollar standpoint. I think it was more just like I feel comfortable enough with what I have banked in savings and investments that I'm willing to already leave my job. So if I'm then spending a year abroad in a place with a standard of living that's a lot lower than what we were spending in the US, then I don't really need to worry that much about if I'm going to be okay in Asia. So that's kind of my rationale. We don't necessarily have like a budget per day, but we were just for shits and giggles, like thinking about how much money we've been spending every day. And honestly, I think people have this misconception about how expensive it is to be in Asia, like especially Japan. People have thoughts of like, oh, Japan's so expensive. And we're not in Japan right now, but like I said, we did live in Japan previously for a few months. And I would say it's similar to Korea in terms of like daily spend. In Korea here, honestly, on a daily average between Ramon and I as two people, we spend like $100 a day, which is nothing. You know, like $100 a day would get you like a brunch and like an Uber in San Francisco, you know what I mean? It was just like compared to that, it's just like I don't have to worry about the money necessarily because we were just spending an astronomical amount of money to just exist in the States, especially in San Francisco. So it's not like a huge concern for us because Airbnb wise, also, like, you can, it's all up to you. Like, you can spend $10,000 a month if you want on your Airbnb, but you can also do that with your rent if you're really that ballin', but you don't have to. Most Airbnbs that we're finding are way cheaper than what our rent was in San Francisco. So, again, it's like we're saving thousands of dollars on living, and then we're saving a ton of money on just like daily expenditure. So, I don't have this like tight budget that I'm going after. I'm just like, let's just be reasonable with what we spend. And like, things are honestly cheap enough here that if you're not going to like fancy restaurants every day, you're going to be fine. Like, really practical example is we went to this ramen restaurant that's like two doors down from our Airbnb this week, and it's like really good, like really high quality, but it's not like a fancy place. It's just like, it's a nice casual kind of like sit down. It was 9,000 won, which right now with the like US conversion rate, it's like $7 for a bowl of ramen. So like if you can eat meals for under $10, like what do you have to worry about? You know what I mean? So that's kind of where the financial aspect is coming from. It's not a tight budget that I'm keeping to. It's more just like realistically, once you fly over here, because the flight is obviously expensive to like fly to Asia, but once you actually get here, your Airbnbs and your daily expenditure compared to if you are living in somewhere very expensive like San Francisco or New York, you don't have to worry about your budget because you're going to be spending a lot less.
Nice. So, I mean, it sounds like you had like a rough idea of where you wanted to go and not like a very strict schedule. So, understanding that the cost of living is much lower than where you were, you just felt really comfortable making the jump for it with the both of you. I think that totally makes sense, and I also, at the risk of sounding semi-tone deaf, because I know that we are making a certain level, we are in a certain income level bracket, but my friends and I have been making this joke that's like, when we make bad decisions with money, as in like just excessively go to events or drinking or whatever, the joke is always that, money will always come back around again. And it's kind of true. Like, you can always make more money later on, but you can't really buy the time back that you didn't use to do something that you really wanted to do.
Yeah, 100%. And I will add a few more things. One is like, obviously, great point, like our income bracket or whatever, our baseline standard of living is at a certain place. So that's kind of like where I'm speaking from. But I've lived that life too, where like I was really poor, like when we were doing study abroad. I did study abroad twice in college, so like I was really poor back then. It was like, oh, let's take this $10 Ryanair flight where I can only have like a backpack and then stay at this janky hostel where there might be bed bugs. I've done all of that, so I know what that life is like too. And I will say, I think there's a balance. So like, honestly, if you want to come here and you just want to like maximize your dollars and you want to do things but not spend money on like food or whatever, if you really wanted to, you could buy 80-cent onigiris and eat that for every meal. You know what I mean? Those little rice balls, the Japanese rice balls, they sell them in the convenience stores that are made like fresh daily for what, like 1,000 won, which is like 80 cents. And is the same in Japan. They were sold for like, 1,000 yen or whatever, which is like $1 or 90 cents or whatever. So like if you really wanted to, you could spend like less than $5 on food every day if that's not your priority, so that you have more money to like go see sites or whatever that cost money with tickets and whatnot. So there are definitely like different things you can do to like maximize whatever is important to you. It's just like we're in this place where I could eat not convenience store food, but still have it be like cheap enough. Like honestly, I think most places, if you're just having a normal meal, not a like super touristy, beachfront type place, you can get between $7 to $12 for a meal. It's so cheap.
That's pretty good, honestly. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well.
Oh, and sorry, one more thing I will
go
say is just like another like obvious given that I'm kind of overlooking here is that we have the flexibility to do this because we are both remote work friendly people. I understand that it's like a lot harder for people who have stricter jobs in terms of like geography, like they demand that you're in the office, a couple days a week or all the time or whatever. So that's definitely like a context that I can't overlook. If you don't have that flexibility, it's definitely going to be a lot harder. But I will say, if you like really want to do something, I think you can make it happen because especially now with the world having changed with COVID in terms of like remote work, if your current job doesn't let you do that, get a new job. I mean, easier said than done, but like there are so many jobs now that are remote friendly that like if your priority is to live abroad for a year, I am sure that you could find a job that would allow you to do that, whether it's actually based in Asia or like allows you to work from anywhere as long as you're willing to work weird hours. It really just depends on like what your priorities are and how much of a fire you have within you to make that happen. Because I keep alluding to like this time that we lived in Asia, in Japan previously. I made that happen. It was not given to me as an opportunity. I was working at a tech company that did not allow remote work, and I positioned myself in a way where I convinced them to let me work from Japan for 2 months.
I was like, you should still be here then. You'd be stuck there.
I know, right? No. God, no. For 2 months. And it was not easy to convince them, but if you're looking for like a short-term thing and there is like, I don't know, you have like a local team that you sometimes work with, or you have like clients there, or I don't know what, there are many different ways, but like if you can position why you would bring value to that situation to be there, there are ways that you could like convince your current boss to like let you be there for a short stint if you're not looking for like a big leap of changing jobs or whatever. I'm just saying it's not impossible. It just obviously like depends on how much you are going to put into it to like make that happen if you're not currently in a situation where you could just live and work anywhere.
Yeah, I will second that. I've gotten lucky a few times, but also like I pushed for certain things certain times, and like it is work. Like it's not gonna fall into your lap. So like the times that generally I've traveled for work, like I pitched my boss that idea using like my own time because I really wanted to do that. So trade-offs, right? Like sometimes it's juice is worth the squeeze if you really want to do it. If you want to do it another route just by taking vacation, that's also cool. But yeah. All right, was that all of your travel tips? Okay, sweet. I guess since you, well, I'm sure you have like way more, but we'll save it for the socials. Packing tips, beauty tips, K-beauty. So now that you've been traveling for like a month and a half, or even longer, I guess, since you've been basically digitally abroad for like the better half of the year, do you still have the travel bug?
Lols. I wouldn't say I have the travel bug. It's different, I think, once you're in a place where you're constantly traveling. So I have only been in Asia for a month and a half, but I have been homeless. I mean, if you want to put it the most like crude way, I've been homeless in terms of like I don't have a permanent residence since last May. So for over a year. So I've been living, place to place, like Airbnb to Airbnb, different cities for over a year. I think when you're in that kind of state, it's not necessarily the same thing as saying you have the travel bug, because I remember that feeling where it's like, oh, I haven't been traveling in like a long time. I'm like dying to go to my friend's wedding in Thailand, or like to this, vacation I've been saving up for like a year or whatever. It's not the same as that. It's more just like you're trying to maximize what you're getting out of your everyday, knowing that you're getting to like see different things every day. So, and like, yes, we are and still waiting for and anticipating Japan opening up. So, from that respect, we both are still like really excited for and like anticipating the Japan experience. But no, I wouldn't say I have the travel bug in terms of like, oh, I like can't wait. It's more just like I'm here, like let's like do the thing.
Got it. Well, you haven't made it to Japan yet, but I wanted to ask you, like, if you got kind of a certain feeling being in Korea versus Japan. And I mean that, like, usually once for example, when I go back to Taiwan, the first few days I'm like, ooh, I feel so, like, outsidery, right? Like, you're, like, acclimating to the surroundings. And then, like, about, like, day 3 or day 4, I'm like, okay, I feel at home now. And it's a really nice feeling. So, like, in your travels so far, have you reached that anywhere?
Yeah. Well, your question started with Korea versus Japan, so I'll try to hit on that too. But yes, I did have a very distinct kind of like transition. So the first, you're right, 3 days. It was 3 days for me. The first 3 days in Korea were pretty rough for me, to be honest. I do think there's a difference when you are coming to a place for vacation as like a short stint versus like knowing that you're going to be living there for like a longer period of time. I think when it's vacation, it's really easy to come to a place and just, especially Americans, we're so like obnoxious, right? Like just be the obnoxious Americans stereotype and just like, I don't speak the language, I'm just gonna speak English and like be obnoxious, and I don't care about like the local manners and rules or whatever. I'm just here for like 10 days, I'm just gonna maximize my fun. I think it's really easy to be in that mindset when you're just on vacation. But when you know you're going to be there for like an extended period of time, I think it's not uncommon, and it's definitely common for me to feel like I have some sort of, to feel like people have expectations of me to like be a little bit more chill, and integrated and like try to fit in as much as possible given your capability with language barriers and whatnot. So the first 3 days, I was pretty shook. Well, number one, I had like really bad jet lag. I think age really does change things, because I don't remember ever having jet lag more than one day. Where it was like, I remember it would be like, okay, if I just power through the first day and like force myself to sleep at the normal local time, I'll be fine the next day. And this was the first time where it was like, it took 3 days. Like I was wrecked those 3 days where I just could not like be awake at the proper times, and I was just like so cranky and like stressed out because I couldn't sleep properly. And then all these things were stressing me out because I had this experience in Japan, right, where I felt a stronger pull to like conform. I think Japan is known for that, right? Like society is very much about like conformity. Yeah, don't stand out and like just like do what everyone else is doing. So I remembered that from Japan, and I kind of assumed that Korea would be the same. So I think I felt really pressured to like try to like not stand out and like to fit in. And I felt really embarrassed that I couldn't speak any Korean, because especially we have to wear masks everywhere still, like not outdoor but indoor. But at the time when we got there, it was everywhere, even outdoor you still had to wear a mask. So like walking around, me and Ramon with the mask especially, you can't really tell what kind of Asian I am, right? You're like, oh, she's Asian, so she must be Korean. So they would start talking to me in Korean, and I'd feel really like embarrassed because I'd be like, fuck, I don't know, sorry, like no English. Yeah. And so I felt like a lot of shame for that. And then there were things like, how we were taught like you don't leave food on a plate, right? Like, so just fucking finish it because it's like ungrateful or it's a bad look or it's like a waste of money or whatever. So I was also like forcing myself to like finish all the food that we're ordering because the portions in Korea are a lot bigger than I expected them to be. Like they're honestly Western portions. So like we over ordered a few times at a couple places because based on the prices, we thought it was like a lot less food. We were sorely mistaken. So I felt all this like pressure to like not embarrass, I guess, ourselves and the chef at the restaurant by like not finishing the food. There are just all these things I was doing in my own head. And then also there were things like in Asia, the motorcycles and cars just like come right up to you like while they're driving. Like basically as long as they don't hit you, that is the way they drive. And I was not used to that because I've experienced it in Taiwan and stuff previously, but it's been a long time. So I was getting really stressed out because I was like, oh my God, this car is about to hit me, or like this motorcycle is about to hit me. And so I was just like, yeah, there was a lot of like stress factors. And then I think it took, yeah, the first like half a week or whatever. And then after that, I started acclimating. And then I realized, especially all those like pressures don't really exist. And I'm just like, inventing them because Korea and Japan are actually quite different from that respect. Korea actually is not that much about conformity. Like, yes, there is a certain level of that still, but there's a lot more like leeway, I think, in terms of like you just being your own person. Other little things is like Japan is a very like quiet country, I feel like people don't like talk loudly or whatever, and Koreans are a lot more like boisterous, so even when they're not drunk, so like you hear like girls like loudly laughing and like talking and gossiping and whatever, and it was just like, oh, this is different. Like it's less like stuffy formal, I would say, which is a lot of times what it can feel like in Japan. So yeah, anyways, yeah, I put a lot on myself, I think, those first few days that were not necessary.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's anxiety, girl. Just get some Xanax.
Lols. I think a lot of it comes from like what we talked about with a couple of guests about kind of the like frozen culture, like the idea of a culture
Your
being
concept
frozen
of
in
it.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had all these like concepts of what Asia in general and Korea, because I'm here, was going to be like in terms of what people would expect from me. And then I got here and I was like, no one expects that from me. This is just me, like with a really outdated version of what this culture is supposed to be like. So yeah.
So you mentioned like when you were wearing masks, people couldn't tell if you were Korean or not. So how good were the Koreans at clocking A, whether you were Korean or not, and B, if they clocked that you weren't Korean, were they good at figuring out like what kind of Asian you were?
Okay, so I think there's kind of two things. I think that in Asia, in general, it's not necessarily that they think you are their nationality, it's that they assume you can at least speak the language if you're Asian and in their country. So I don't actually think everyone who saw me thought I was Korean, especially because I'm really dark and like everyone's really pale here. So like naturally there's probably a little bit of like I'm confused by her. But the default is to assume even if you're not they're Asian, if you are in their country, you probably are like, I don't know, working here or studying here or whatever, and like know their language more so than like they have no expectations of Ramon, right? Like because visually he is not Asian. So it's not, yeah, I don't know that they're always assuming I'm Korean. I think maybe with the mask now more they are doing that because they really can't see any of my other features besides my eyes, but I think it's more just like an assumption of the language at least. And this is something I think we talked about in the 4th of July episode, which is going to be the one right after this next week. But we pre-recorded it and I kind of gave a preview, which is like, I don't think Asians in Asia think necessarily about what kind of Asian you are necessarily. Like, if you speak English, like if you are obviously American, for example, I think that is actually what they think of you more as than whatever your ethnicity is. So like they'd always like try to talk to me in Korean, and then I'd be like, oh, sorry, English. I try to like pass by as much as possible because sometimes they say very similar things where I'm just like, we can just pretend like I know what you're saying to make everyone feel more comfortable. Like, we'll come in. Yeah, we'll come into a restaurant and, they'll say like welcome in Korean, and then I'll flash like two for like two people, and then, or no, they'll say something, which I assume is how many people, and then I'll flash a two, and then they'll say like, oh, sit wherever you want, or like sit here, they'll gesture, and then I'll just like nod, and then we'll just walk over, and I'll just pretend, right? Because like it makes everyone feel more comfortable if it's just like the seamless thing. And then I only break it when it has to be broken, which is then if they like start asking me actual things when we sit down, and then I'll be like, oh, sorry, English. Yeah, but oh shit, what was the question? Like,
it was whether or not people could clock if you were Asian or not, and if they were and if they were able to, like, what kind of Asian were you accurately.
I think once I said English, like they're just like, oh, okay, and then they just assume I'm American. And then randomly Korea and Japan really love Spain, like we don't know why. So then Ramon will say like, I'm from Spain, and then everyone will be like, I love Spain, and then it's a whole thing. So
because they were part of the
I'm
Axis
from the
of Evil
US
in World War II.
Oh,
no, I'm kidding. I don't know. I mean, technically they were. It was Franco, Hitler, Japan.
I don't know.
Sort of.
Yeah, but Korea is not part of that, and Korea loves Spain too. I don't know. Anyways, so they're just like, they love Spain, and then I say I'm from the US, and they just leave it at that. They're not like, no, but like, what are you? They don't care about that kind of shit. Or like sometimes Ramon will offer it because I think he thinks they're asking that, and I don't really think they're asking that. So like sometimes in Japan, for example, back then he would say like, oh, she's from Taiwan. And I was like, I'm not from Taiwan. I'd be like, yeah, my family is from Taiwan. I am from the US. And they'd be like, oh, okay. So it's less of a thing, I think, because, and we can get into this if you want it to become a whole thing, but like, I think there is a very big difference when you are visibly the majority and not a minority. Like there's like, even if I'm not actually Korean or actually Japanese, because I'm Asian, visually I don't stand out as much, so they care less, I guess, about the like difference that I bring with my actual ethnicity, as opposed to like Ramon or something, and it'd be like, oh, Spain. It's like
yeah. I mean, I guess it makes sense because they're all closer, so the likelihood that they met a Taiwanese person or like Japanese or whatever is much higher than they would have met like a Spanish person or something like that. But you preempted one of my questions because I was like, did you get seen as American? And I think it's really interesting because you're like, in my mind when you were saying that, I was like, oh, there's like a taxonomy now where it's like, it's not just like, it's not by how you appear, but rather like, do you live in the West? Do you live in the East? Okay, cool. Now you're like this beneath that. Now I'm gonna like break out that hierarchy in that manner. That's really, I guess I never thought about it that way, but that is also very congruent with my experience.
I also think Koreans, as opposed to Japanese, there's a lot more there are a lot more Korean Americans who move back to Korea than I think Japanese Americans who move back to Japan. So there's actually a lot of Americans here. Like they're so unassuming. But like for example, we were in Seoul and there was like a coffee shop that we went into and we were trying to find somewhere with plugs so that we could work. And this one young woman, like our age type of woman, was like on the phone or whatever, and then she saw us kind of struggling, and then she spoke in like perfect American English and was like, oh, this is the only plug here, sorry, like. And so we're like, oh, okay. But she was like on the phone in Korean, you know. It was like there's so many of those types of people here that I think the concept of being American but Asian appearing is so normal for them that it's not like they'd be like, oh, you're not really American because you're not white. Like they know enough people that are like living in America that are American but are Korean that it's understandable that a different Asian could be American.
Yeah, like your friend Sunbin. If I was in Korea, I wouldn't have. I mean, I don't know enough to clock her and be like, she's not natively Korean, you know. So, but it sounds like you didn't get any trouble. You don't have any trouble to get people to talk to you. Was that your experience in Korea, and how does that differ in Japan? From Japan?
What do you mean by get people to talk to me? Because I guess that's different.
So like, you know, like how certain cities have like a reputation where people like don't want to speak to you unless you can speak the language. So for example, like I think Paris is always like top of mind when you think about people who are like not willing to engage if you don't know like at least a smidge of the language. And I think New York also has that reputation where it's like people don't want to talk to you. Did you get that feeling, or did you get that feeling where it's like people were really open to like helping you out, having a conversation?
Well, okay, so I think I will separate, like, I haven't just made like random friends, for example, in Korea, so I wouldn't go as far as to say like people are like so open that they're like, let's become friends. I can tell you're American and I want to be your friend, right? I wouldn't say that, but I would say in Korea, there is definitely a more willingness to engage with you, even if there is a language barrier, than in Japan, for example. I think that it's not okay. How do I explain this? Okay, with young people, I don't sense any judgment when I can't speak Korean. It's more just like, oh, okay, like let me just like reframe, right? And like I'll talk to you again in like whatever way we're able to communicate. With older people, like the ajumas, like the like older ladies who are working in restaurants or like at a food market or whatever, I think there is a tinge of disappointment because like I've heard it a few times where they're like, I and I should know what this phrase is by now, but I know Korean is Hango, at least like Hanguo, right? So they ask like Hango, blah blah blah. Basically, do you speak Korean? And then I'll be like, no. And then they'll be like, you know, like a little bit of like disappointment about it. But then we'll stumble our way through it because their English is usually not as good as like the young people. But it's not like they're like, okay, now I'm gonna be like an asshole to you. I think it's slightly different than like Paris is a really good example. Sorry for all the French stereotypes, but I did work for a French company and I did go to Paris for a week for work. So like I did experience some of this. Yeah, their stereotype is that in France there's more of a looking down at you, right? If you can't speak the language. I don't think there's a looking down at you here. I think it's like, if anything, a slight disappointment of like, oh, like I wish you did. But there's not like, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I think sometimes though, if they really don't speak any English, it can come off cold, but it's not that they're trying to be rude. They just like don't really know how to like engage with you. So like I've noticed, for example, like they will barely say anything to us and just like throw chopsticks on the table and like whatever, versus like I see them talking to like Korean people in like a very gregarious, friendly manner. And I think if we weren't Asian, you know, I would take that a different way. For example, like in Chinese restaurants in the US, right? Like a lot of non-Chinese and non-Asian people can say, oh, those people are so rude, right? The people who work in those restaurants, they're so like crass, and there's no like small talk and blah blah blah, right? Versus like we understand what that is. It's like they're trying to be efficient, and like they probably also, a lot of them probably don't know that much English anyway, so they're just trying to like, you know, serve you in as efficient of a manner as possible. So that's kind of how I see it with like some of these older Korean women that like don't speak any English, and they're not being like, they're not trying that hard with us. I think it's more just that they, you know, they're just trying to like do what they can. And I can tell, because then when we're paying and we like say goodbye, they're like really gracious. Then they're like, oh, thank you so much. And like, what? So it's obvious that it's more just like we have a language barrier. So they're just like doing what they can, you know?
Okay. So I guess we've learned a lot about Asia and Korea. Well, you haven't done the whole thing yet, so we'll have to check back with you when you made it in Japan. But maybe just a few just kind of like general travel questions about like maintaining your existing social life and stuff like that. So how did you stay in touch with people? Like, what are like the winning methods that you had to make yourself still feel connected to your friends at home?
Good question. I don't think I'm like that good about that, frankly. But I think just taking advantage of like the few hours that you do have an overlap with people is really important, because the time zone is going to really mess with you once you are living on the other side of the world. So like I am lucky in that Asia is not as bad as like, I think it's pretty bad when you're trying to work. Like I remember working with Japan and India when I was in San Francisco, and that was like almost impossible, because from a workday perspective, there's very few hours of overlap. But when it's just your like friends, you can text them at like 9 p.m. their time. It's totally fine, right? So like I just try to maximize the amount of time that exists in overlap to like send a text, or sometimes I have been FaceTiming people or like quick call or whatever. And just keeping them, I think, up to date as much as possible, so that it doesn't seem like I just like blipped off the side of the earth. But I don't think I've been like that good about that. But honestly, I'm thinking back and I'm like, was I ever that good about that? I don't know. It's not like I was like calling my friends every day when I was in San Francisco either. So it's just kind of like doing what I can when like something reminds me of them, or like I have a question for them or whatever. But like being mindful of the time zone difference, because I have noticed that if you just text them at like a random time that's like 3 a.m. their time, a lot of times you don't get a text back, because then they're like, they probably saw it at a weird time, and then they're like, oh, now they're asleep, and then they don't text you back, and whatever. Just make sure you text and call during like normal human hours for them.
Or weird hours for me, because I keep weird hours.
Yes, I will say the only thing that has been like hard is therapy is difficult, because they do work on like work hours, right? So like my therapist is like doing me a favor to take my calls as late as she does. She takes it at like 4 p.m. her time. I think she usually would not want to take that late of a session. But it's like 8 a.m. for me. So I'm kind of like, that's kind of the earliest I would want to be taking therapy, because I don't think I would be like in a good mindset if I like just wake up and blah, blah. So I think there are challenges with things where you have to work around like an actual like work schedule, so other people's work schedules, so just be mindful of that. But you can always make anything work, I think.
Got it. And final question before the close. They say that you don't really ever truly know your partner until you travel with them. Do you feel like you truly know your partner now?
Yes, but I think I've known him for a long time, because we have been traveling.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, that initial Japan 2-monther was our first like
crash course.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Because it was also before we moved in together. It was
right.
such a thing. It was such a thing because we were like, if we can't live 2 months in Japan together, we cannot live together, like in general. So I would say that was the biggest like clash time where it was like, I'm learning everything that annoys me about you and vice versa. So yeah, I think I know everything about him by now.
I mean, you know, I you have you know the person with all of the disclosures now. That sounds very great. All right, well, shall we move over to the fortune cookie close?
Yeah.
Because we always like to end on a sweet treat. That last question I feel like was maybe a little difficult, so I am going to end on a very simple question for the close. Do you have a favorite moment from your time in Korea so far?
Huh.
This wasn't supposed to be a stumper.
Yeah, it was not supposed to be, but well, because we've done so many things, I feel like, so I'm kind of like, what has been my favorite thing? I don't know that I have like one favorite thing because I think the moments that stand out are like food moments that
Of
stand
course.
out because that's a lot of what we do is just eat really good food. So I have a couple of those in my head, but I would say having Lindsay with us for a week was probably like one of my highlights so far because it was just really, really nice to have one of my best friends with us and in a different country, right? Because then it's like an adventure that you guys are on. And I think it also like speaks to what we've talked about with like mental health, which is like I love Ramon, obviously, but we have only been spending time with each other for the last year, year plus because of COVID, right? With like stints with hanging out with people, but especially when we live on the road, we don't see our friends that frequently. So it was just really nice to have like a third energy come into our dynamic and like bring a lot of levity and stuff into situations and like a totally different perspective and like ideas to do things and like willingness to help and stuff like that. So it was just such a joy to have her with us, I think, for that week and a half. And I also think it helped in like it helped kind of rejuvenate us too in terms of like by the end of it I was like, oh, I'm really happy she came, but I'm ready for some like privacy again in terms of like just us two again, which is like a rare feeling when you are just always with only one person. You never feel like, oh, I just want to be with you again. It's like I can't stand being with you anymore. So it was nice that like a week and a half could do all of that with our friend.
Work. Shout out Bethany
Yeah.
Lindsay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your travel adventures with us so far. I hope that Japan and Taiwan open soon, so that you guys can get in
yeah.
there and complete the 2 and the 3 legs of your Asia trip.
Thanks.
Listeners, if you have any questions for Angela regarding her trip, maybe you have recommendations, maybe you have other logistical, budgetary, philosophical questions for her about traveling, feel free to write us in at telluswhereyou'refrom@gmail.com or also DM us on any of the socials.
And come back next week because we'll have our final episode of this batch before we take a little break. And yeah, until then,
再见, bitches.